Well, welcome to Tim's Tips. Have David Breeden with me again. You remember David was going over some new products and different things. We got to talking a little bit about the new Auto-Tune saws and a little bit about how to calibrate them. And so we found out, kind of talking to different people and different organizations, that oftentimes dealerships set the saw up correctly, but then they go back, like with cities, towns, and states, they go back and they sit for a while, or they might go to a different region of the country, and people are getting a little bit disgruntled because they can't mess with the screws, you know what I mean? And it's important that, you think about that filter's got to be clean. You got to make sure you got high speed to that flutter, that four-stroking. You got a little bit to think about. It should idle down without your clutch engaged. The chain should stop turning. It should then idle in all positions. And then when you hit that throttle, it should go back up to high speed without any hesitation. And we found out that the Auto-Tune really does a better job of that than somebody with a screwdriver in some cases, because it's taken, what is it, David, something like adjustment every 300ths of a second or something like that?
Approximately 10 times per revolution. So if the saw's running at 13,500 RPMs, I'm not that good at math. It's a lot of adjustments, a lot of information being gathered in 60 seconds.
And that thing is, as we put out a little bit of a video 2 or 3 weeks ago, you can look that up on the website and also on our YouTube channel. But it is something that shows a little bit about how that thing works technically. And it basically adjusts for heat, RPM. It uses an ignition system as well as the fuel in and out of the carburetor to be able to maintain the best. But what we want to try to show here today is you've got 3 brand new saws, right? They're fresh out of the box?
Yeah, that's correct. They were, all I did was put the bar and chain on them. Did not crank them up until we filmed our portion of the video.
Okay, and the other thing is that you've got what type of fuel in here now?
So the fuel that is in all 3 of these saws is our Husqvarna pre-mix fuel. It's 95 octane. Great thing about pre-mixed fuels is their shelf life. We boast that this fuel is good for 5 years if you don't open the can, and if the can is open, that it'll last for 3 years. That's just unparalleled with gas out of the pump, no matter whether it has ethanol or not.
And definitely with canned fuels, you have consistency.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest thing, because when you go from vendor of fuel for automobiles to the next one, and sometimes you can go back there in the next 4, 5, 6 months to that same station. There may be different vapor pressures. There may be different additives for winter use and summer use. All of these things tend to change, and when you mix it up with mix oil, a lot of times you're going to get variations there. Now you can find the right thing. You can actually be able to find out what works for your time of year in your area with the fuel that you have and adjust things out. But the Auto-Tune does it all automatically for you.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting, Tim, no matter what brand you use, if you have a high performance chainsaw, you should be concerned about the octane rating on your fuel. If you're buying fuel at a gas station, you need to be buying the highest octane that you can get. As the moment that you take it from the pump into the can that you're putting it in, the octane rating is starting to decrease. So if you don't use that fuel in 2 weeks, then what is the actual octane rating on the fuel that you're using? So that's very important. Invest a little bit extra for great fuel.
And octane is basically under pressure, under that compression, which these things are high compression racing engines basically, and under that compression, how smoothly it burns, correct? And then your oils that you mix, and in this case probably you've got synthetic in all 3 of these, so you've got a very clean burn. Sure. And you've got highest octane that you know of, and basically that means a very smooth, consistent run. But I think we'll see out of the box it takes a little bit of time for them to adjust out, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I chose this saw to bring over here. We had 2 others, but this saw did not want to idle out of the box. it's very interesting how the other two, they cranked right up and they idled. Part of the setup procedure is a minimum of 5.5 minutes of idle, and I had to baby this saw, if you will, to get it to idle for 5.5 minutes. It would crank up fine. I didn't take it to full speed, but I did hit the throttle a little bit to try to warm it up, and it cut off a few times, and I finally got it to idle. And then after I went through the high speed adjustment, all of the carburetor functions are there. It idles, it cranks fine. So this saw was in need of an adjustment out of the box, and I would be concerned as to what would have happened with this saw had it not been set up properly like we did today.
You could definitely, going through on the adjustments on these things, holding them open and wide open through a ripping cut, and that's what we'll try to illustrate later. But it's something to where you could actually hear it was erratic runs, and then in probably 30-45 seconds to a minute, they all smoothed out. It started throwing chips like crazy. And another thing that we were kind of looking at, if there was a concern there, because a lot of people always ask, well, what about, I'm not comfortable with holding my saw wide open. And, I myself, I don't really stand there for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes holding it wide open, not under load, because the temperature does go up. But it is an air-cooled engine, so basically it tries to stabilize itself. But what we noticed here, we had at idle, we checked the temperature at the muffler. It's just using just a simple pyrometer, more or less a grill thermometer. And then looking after we did that rip and cut, and the temperatures were very stable. And as soon as it started to idle at that point, the temperatures started to go up. And at that time, it's an air-cooled engine, so that temperature has to dissipate from all of the aluminum, magnesium, internal and external parts. Probably the first thing to cool down is the muffler, but then all that heat starts generating out of the internal parts. So, a lot of people tell me, well, I want to let it idle for a while afterwards. In a lot of cases, that's where some carbon buildup and things can happen. So, there's all kinds of different variables, elevations, temperatures, moisture in the air, fuel mixes, all of this kind of stuff affects it. But one thing neat is that little chip, because it's designed that way, understands how to make that adjustment to the max. I mean, it's basically the best that it can do.
My name is David Breeden. I'm going to go through the proper setup procedure for Husqvarna chainsaws that have Auto-Tune. What we have here are 3 XP models that are fairly common: 550 XP, 562 XP, and a 572 XP. I just took these saws out of the box, put the bar and chains on them. They have not been ran at all yet, with the exception of the small amount of time that they're ran in the factories. But we're going to crank each of these saws up individually, and we're going to allow them to idle for a minimum of 5.5 minutes each. At that point, we'll let it do its carburetor adjustment on the low speed side. We will take the saws and then we'll run them through this log at wide open throttle for a period of what would be about a minute. You should hear the carburetor making tuning adjustments on the high speed side, and that is the proper setup for Auto-Tune on Husqvarna chainsaws right out of the box. always worthy of talking about proper startup procedures, no matter what chainsaw you're running. Obviously, you need your personal protection on. You need hearing protection. In this case, you certainly need eye protection and leg protection. We're going to go through the normal startup procedure. This saw has air purge, so I'm going to do that 6 to 8 times until the bulb fills up with fuel. Chain brake is engaged. Put the saw on choke. Pull it till it pops. Take the choke off. So one interesting thing to note, the 550 and the 572, they had no issues idling upon the initial startup. You notice the 562 did not want to idle. I finally got it to idle, but it needed to be tuned out of the box, and it ran for more than 5.5 minutes. And at that point, once I tuned it on the high-speed side, the idle was fine. Let's try it. Idle runs in all positions. Chain doesn't turn at idle and accelerates without hesitation. So saw's running very well now. Didn't run that well on the initial startup.
Talk about the temperatures.
So another test that Tim and I did, there's this misconception that a chainsaw under load at wide open throttle, that's not good for the saws. Chainsaws only have 2-speed. That's idle and wide open throttle. At idle, the saw is going to run hotter than it does at wide open throttle, even under a load. The reason is because it's a traditional 2-stroke engine. The fuel actually cools the engine as that fuel is passing through the porting. So half throttle is one of the worst things you could do with the chainsaw. I don't think you're extending the life of your saw in the cut by running it at half throttle. Most saws are going to run around 13,500, 13,600 out of the box. Under load, obviously, that's going to vary based on what you're cutting and a lot of different factors, but always in the cut, wide open throttle is the best place that you can be with your saw. When carburetors are adjusted properly, regardless of whether they are Auto-Tune or they are just a standard carburetor, you can run it wide open throttle outside of load as long as it's adjusted properly, because at the high side, you're going to hear it dieseling or 4-stroking, whatever you want to call it, but it's basically not allowing the saw to run away. If a saw has more air than fuel, which is what we consider to be lean in the industry, then it's going to over rev, and then you're certainly going to get engine damage, which causes the piston rings to expand, or the piston itself to expand faster than the cylinder, and that causes catastrophic failure or lean seizure. So if the saw's adjusted right, under load, not under load, wide open throttle is fine. So this setup procedure is imperative out of the box with the brand new chainsaw. After that, you do not have to do that. Certainly not 5.5 minute idle times. Anytime you're running your saw, you can do this to make that adjustment. That saw is going to make those adjustments depending on how you're using it. When I'm running a chainsaw, a lot of times I'm cutting large pieces. Even if I'm bucking, in some cases it may take more than a minute to actually make that cut. My saw is making those adjustments, and most people do not have a need to rip logs. One interesting thing that I've noticed, Chad Gainey, if anybody follows Chad's a very good carver. He's a member of the Husqvarna H-Team. He spends a lot of time blocking out pieces of wood for carvings, and his saws are constantly getting tuned. And I think if Chad were here, he would tell me that his saws always run well, no matter what the carburetor functions are. He's getting a lot of reliability out of his chainsaws, and I believe that that's one of the reasons why. You know, Auto-Tune is great technology. If you're allowing your saw to idle a lot, then based on the use, then there may be more of a need to make these adjustments. When I'm going through when I crank my saw up, I'm looking for those 5 things. I'm looking for if the saw will idle in all positions. I'll make sure that the chain doesn't spin at idle. Chainsaws have centrifugal clutches. They engage around 3,000 RPMs. If the saw is idled up, even though you have the chain brake engaged, the clutch is engaged and is trying to turn the chain, so you're going to get a lot of heat and you're going to get extensive clutch wear, and they aren't going to last that long. Then I make sure I take the saw high speed, and I make sure that I have that 4-stroking or dieseling that we're talking about, making sure that my saw is not running too lean to cause damage. And then I want to make sure that my saw accelerates without any hesitation. And I also want to make sure that I have a clean air filter, which is the 5th step of that process. So normally I make sure of that first, but I go through those 4 things. When I have those 4 functions, then I know that my saw is running properly.
Yeah, absolutely. So David, I appreciate you, man. You're always there on top of it all, and your major concerns always with getting that dealer trained, making sure that he understands or she understands, you know, when those things come out of the box, when that customer gets their hands on them, they want to be the best possible unit that it could be. And then the other thing is that after a little bit of time, that end user, that person on the handles, wants to make sure that it's running right. So you were concerned about getting that information out to them. Not necessarily in this case, you know, adjustments could be on the older style carburetors to where when they understand it's not running right, get it to somebody who understands it and adjust it. At least with the Auto-Tune, it does take some of the variables out of it because that saw is thinking for itself a little bit. But you still have to get it through that calibration process. When it's not running right, you got to get it running right. So that's important. So thank you so much for dropping by, and hopefully we've got something here that can help a lot of people. And I appreciate everyone coming by Tim's Tips today. Wish you good sawing.